Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Governor Kelly, for that kind introduction. Now, I'm going to tell you, I counted how many times you guys stood up for her and gave her applause. It was a handful, maybe more. Got the hand joke out of the way early. Anyway, give it up for Governor Kelly one more time, please. It is a pleasure to be here tonight. And you know what? You can come up on stage if you want. You sure? Okay. It is, thank you for having me. It is the first time I've been in Kansas, believe it or not. And I've got to tell you that we flew into Kansas City. And in my remarks right here, I had written down, you know, this reminds me of home because it's flat. And it wasn't flat. There was rolling hills. There was a few irrigation areas that were flat. But you've got a beautiful state here. And the people remind me of home. I will tell you that. My wife and I still farm the land that my grandparents homesteaded. And quite frankly, we've been there for 3 generations, raising everything from wheat to kids. And what's amazing about that is before my grandfather patented that homestead, Buffalo had a hard time making a living there. But we've been all right. We've been doing all right. We've raised some pretty damn good ag products, and we've even raised a few good kids. And Kansas can say the same thing. And Kansas can also say that Montana and Kansas has a lot of other things in common. For example, Donald Trump won Kansas by 20 percentage points in 2016, and Trump won Montana by about the same margin in 2016. Montana sent a dirt farmer back to Washington, D.C. by about 4 percentage points in 2018. And Kansas sent a true public servant back to Topeka by about 6 points in 2018. Now, I don't know what you think, but I think Kansas is pretty damn good. I'm telling you that right now. So the real question is why did Montana decide to pick me over the other guy after sending Trump to Washington, D.C.? How did it happen? And I will tell you the truth is I haven't had a lot of time to think about it because I've had a few things keeping me busy. I'm sure you've noticed we've had a government shutdown to avert. And it is interesting and instructional that Republicans are now using public employees as a political pawn. But we were able to avert the actions of some in the Senate who come hating government and then do the best they can to make sure that government works as bad as it should, as they think it should. And we averted a shutdown by doing something that you very, very seldom see in Washington. We worked together. We compromised, and we didn't take no for an answer. Now, I'm sure you've noticed we have a cabinet full of folks that are intent on rolling back healthcare protections, gutting public education, decimating our public lands, and let me give you a few examples of that. The Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, has spent her life trying to privatize public education. Public education, the great equalizer, the foundation of our economy. As Secretary of Education, she has advocated for education, albeit as long for a select few. The rest of the population, well, you're on your own. Then there's the President's senior trade advisor, a chap by the name of Peter Navarro, who called the cost of tariffs a rounding error. Now, tell that to the farmers who are experiencing foreclosure due to these tariffs, threatening rural America and the food security that it provides. Or Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin, who as Treasury Secretary has exploded the debt with a tax bill that gave billions to the richest of the rich and scraps to everyone else. And then there's Trump's Commerce Secretary, who in the middle of the last government shutdown, the longest in our history, and the third in the last year, said to the public employees, just suck it up and get a loan. In other words, let them eat cake. And that's just to name a few. And then there's the president, who has a tortured relationship with the truth. A man that got 6 deferments during the Vietnam War and claims to be a patriot. A man that got millions of dollars from his daddy and turned that into 6 business bankruptcies. A man with utter disrespect for women in public and in private. The Access Hollywood tape was just not locker room talk. It was just another day at the office. And these are probably the nicest things I could say about it. So I'm not going to stop here. This, got a lot to say tonight, folks. This is a man that has pushed away our closest allies. He has denigrated Merkel and Macron and May, Germany, France, and England. He's described Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of our strongest ally and trade partner, as meek. Trump even has the ability to pick a fight with Sweden and Australia. How the hell do you pick a fight with Sweden and Australia? Really? On the other hand, he's described Vladimir Putin as a smart, tough guy. He's described China's President Xi as a great leader, who is the president of China for life, and then said, maybe we, the USA, ought to give that a shot someday. For Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea, a deceitful chap at best, he has described him as somebody that he has fell in love with. With President Trump at the helm, we have a leader who doesn't believe in freedom of the press, who believes that building walls brings people together, and thinks that the 3 branches of government are a nuisance. So I've been a little busy, okay? But this is what I know about my 2018 election. I went everywhere in Montana. I showed up. I listened, as my grandparents said, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, act accordingly, and I did. I talked to people that agreed with me and people that didn't. I listened to Montana's concerns on healthcare, on education, on broadband infrastructure. I took those concerns back to Washington, and I fought for solutions. And our victory certainly wasn't for a lack of trying by President Trump, who showed up in Montana 4 times to rail against me. The Vice President showed up 3 times, and little Donald Trump showed up so many times that he's actually thinking about running for governor of the state of Montana. And it wasn't a lack of trying by the Republican special interest, who spent $24 million lying about my record, a record which fought for and continues to fight for veterans and teachers in rural communities. But in the end, when Montanans were offered a choice between those who distorted the version of me and my real record and what I have gotten done for the people of my great state, they voted for me, and I'm proud that they did. But the fact is that you don't need to tell me to tell you about the playbook, because here in Kansas you are writing your own. Democrats up and down the ticket were on the ground in communities across the state. You showed up and you listened. It wasn't long ago that the pundits wrote Democrats off in Kansas altogether. They put it firmly in the red column. You proved them wrong. Governor Kelly took on a man whose singular goal was to make it harder for folks to vote. What kind of an American would have the singular focus of stopping people from voting? I thought that was an important tenet of our democracy. Thank God Kansas saw through him. And she also proved she could right the extreme damage that Governor Brownback's draconian budget cuts have inflicted on Kansans. So Governor Kelly talked about kitchen table issues like health care, Medicaid, as she has tonight, public education, responsible budgets. Congresswoman Davids took on a sitting congressman and became one of the many new voices in Washington, D.C. that are making Congress look a lot more like America. And she did it by talking about some of the very same issues: the cost of health care, the cost of higher education, the lousy tax bill that Congress passed about a year ago. Back in 2005, when I ran my first United States Senate race, reporters had asked me why I was running. I would talk about my kids, I would talk about your kids, I would talk about the next generation, I would talk about infrastructure, affordable health care, affordable college tuition, the challenges of living in rural America and how rural America cannot be forgotten about. I would talk about how the greatest country on our earth didn't happen by accident. It happened through hard work and vision and sacrifice. I wanted them to know that I took pride in the calluses on my hands, that the policies coming out of Washington, D.C. didn't contain much vision for the folks in rural states. And then when it was time for my kids to come back for the farm, unfortunately, they chose not to. And they did it because health care costs were too high. And they also did it because of the depopulation of rural America that has shrunk our schools to the point that they can't offer the same opportunity that they did when I was a kid. We need to change that. And even though my kids did not come back to the farm, I have great hope for my grandkids. And they continue to be a reminder of why I'm in Washington, D.C. and what is truly important in this world. I would imagine that some of you have a very similar story. They are the reasons that we fight for family farms and ranches, for public schools, for access to health care, and good-paying jobs, so that other families won't have to make that choice, so that you will be able to stay here, and more importantly, your kids will be able to stay in Kansas and fight for the state and the country that they love. Accessible health care and good-paying jobs and affordable education. These are universal American values, and they're also our party's values. But often, too often, in rural America, they believe that the Democratic Party has left them behind, that campaigns often no longer look for their support. And some political consultants have already pulled them off the electoral map. Rural folks believe that politicians in Washington, D.C. aren't fighting for their families, that their issues have been written off the legislative process. We can't write rural America off. We cannot cede that ground. Our party is a big tent. We don't have to have shared experiences to have shared values. Those values are what makes us great and what helps us win. And it also requires us to roll up our sleeves to improve the policies that affect our lives every day. And boy, do we have work to do. Here in Kansas, you know that work starts, as the governor said, with the correcting the damage that Republican lawmakers inflicted in an ideological quest to increase barriers to health care and not reduce them. As you know, Kansas has the unwelcome distinction of being one of 14 states that hasn't expanded Medicaid. And I know the folks in this room are working hard to change that because it's sorely needed. Since my state of Montana expanded Medicaid, more than 90,000 Montanans have gained access to health care, and that's in a state of 1 million population. The state has saved $58 million. And since many of these folks now have access to health care for the first time, Medicaid expansion is directly responsible for the creation of 5,000 new jobs in Montana alone. But Montana is not unique, and the governor alluded to this. Every state that has expanded Medicaid has seen similar positive impacts. Unfortunately, right now, as we speak, there are those in Montana's legislature that is meeting right now that want to repeal Medicaid expansion. I don't get it. I guess they figure I got mine, so to hell with everybody else. This is important stuff. This is the most important stuff. And so keep fighting to increase Kansans' access to health care. Look, you've also seen the damage when politicians try to privatize public education. Voucher it, charter it, do anything you can do to push dollars away from public education. Nothing, and I mean nothing, has done more to support our democracy, nothing has done more to uplift our economy, and nothing has done more to be the great equalizer, giving everyone a shot at success, the American dream, than public education has done. So let's not let the ideologues turn our economy into a second-rate economy. If you want to keep America great, you need to make the investment in public education, or we will never, ever be able to collect the dividend. My grandmother immigrated to this country at age 16. She did it alone. She did it because this was a land of opportunity because of our public education system. My grandmother and grandfather had 4 children, 1 boy and 3 girls. The boy started farming. The 3 girls in the 1930s went to college and received their degrees because Grandma knew how important a college degree was to her daughters. Today, middle-class families can't afford college. Kids are coming out of school with $30,000 and $40,000 and $50,000 in debt. And that stops many great minds from going to college and being all they can be. We need to once again prioritize funding for our universities around this country to drive down those educational costs for the next generation of workers, business people, and entrepreneurs. So I'm going to talk about something that not many Democrats talk about. Our national debt is $22 trillion. When I got back to D.C. in January of 2007, all I heard from the other side of the aisle was debt, debt, debt. Being new to the Senate back in 2007, I thought this was very interesting because it was just a short time earlier that I heard Vice President Cheney say that debt didn't matter. What I didn't realize was that because Democrats controlled the Senate, debt was an issue. This was very interesting because since 2015, when Republicans took over the Senate, I have heard crickets on the debt. Suddenly, it's not an issue. But we all know that spending and debt is an issue, and it's about priorities. So let me give you an example or two. You pass a tax bill that costs between $1.4 trillion and $2.5 trillion, depending on which conservative think tank you want to get your information from. A bill that gives 62% of the benefits to the top 1% of the population. By the way, that increases to 83% to the top 1% by 2027. And guess what's going to happen? The debt's going to go up considerably. If you pay $24 to $32 million a mile to build a fence to kind of secure our southern border, especially when you can do a better job of securing it with technology for pennies on the dollar, guess what? That's going to go up. Or say you don't believe this country's intelligence community when it comes to North Korea continuing to build nuclear weapons, or that Russia and China are a threat to our security in the Arctic and all over the world, and guess what's going to happen? The debt's going to go up. We are the first generation to inherit from our parents and borrow from our kids. Know that if we want to hand over the world's #1 economy to our kids and grandkids, we have to make tough, fair choices, ones that tackle our debt and doesn't cut working folks off at the knees. Solving these problems is even more critical when the opposition is so firmly against every value we care about. We've got a Twitter-happy president tweeting to distract us from the damage his administration is doing. We've got a White House that is so swampy that Pennsylvania Avenue is sinking. We've got a cabinet full of acting secretaries because most are too extreme to get a majority of votes in the Senate. a healthcare secretary who wants to slash Medicare and Medicaid and take away healthcare coverage from average Americans, as well as, and you guys know this as well as I do, close down rural hospitals. A group of senior advisors who don't believe in climate change. We got a president beholden to Russia and intent on boosting every strongman dictator around the globe. We have an administration hell-bent on isolating our allies and questioning the basic facts. So I don't know about you, but I think we need to win in 2020. But it's not going to be easy. The Supreme Court decision in Citizens United gives our opponents unlimited dark money to try to buy election. It prevents us from seeing who's paying for the TV ads. It could be a guy across the street. It could be a foreign government. The law says we cannot know. But even if the money's in their favor, the facts are on our side. We cannot rest on our laurels. We've got to bring more people to the table, and we've got to convince folks to stay there. You have to stay mobilized, talking to neighbors, making calls, knocking on doors in every corner of this great state. Because we know only by electing folks that share our values is how policies change for the better, whether it's in Helena, Topeka, or Washington, D.C. And that's how we give our kids and grandkids the opportunities we've been blessed to enjoy, no matter where they live. It's how we ensure that we're doing right by our veterans, how we help the generation that came before us retire with dignity. It's how we make the tent bigger, not smaller. Now, I don't need to tell you, it is hard electing Democrats in a red state, but you've done it, and you've done it the old-fashioned way, by hard work. Now, we may not be able to outspend them, but we sure as hell can outwork them. And guess what? Guess what? That work starts tonight. Democrats have a solid story about helping the middle class on health care, on rural policy, on infrastructure, security, and education. We have a great story on building this country and on keeping this country the greatest country that has ever existed on earth. So now is the time. You did it in 2018, and you've got everyone's attention. So get out there and tell the story in the newspapers, on the radio, on TV, door to door. If you do it, I'll tell you what you already know. Democrats will win. I am incredibly grateful that you had me here tonight. You've been very, very kind. I can't thank you enough. And I just want to leave you with what I've just said for the last God knows how many minutes. And that is, Kansas is a-changing. And if you guys, if the people in this room are willing to do the hard work to get good people elected, Kansas will be a-changing for the better. God bless you all. God bless America.